Greetings, 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 everyone. This is Dr. Yam, and welcome to another session inside the Busy 9 to 5ers Hive, writing your biz story. How are you going to be able to use your own story to captivate and engage others? This 5-day challenge is for our aspiring and those who are new to their business as entrepreneurs. And I am your host, Dr. Yam, your Keep It Simple coach inside of the Busy 9 to 5ers Hive, as well as content creation tips and more group. For those of you, once you launch, you need to grow and using content marketing strategies and tips in order to do so. So again, I want to welcome everyone to another session. We're going to be inside of day 3. And so we've just been moving right along. I'm just so excited for each and every one of you who've had an opportunity to carry on and show up every day in order for you to get your story written. And now we're going to talk about how are you going to get it told. So let's get started. If you haven't already done so, make sure that you've accepted the StreamYard app to allow you to leave your comments inside. I'll take questions along the way, so please feel free to do so. And also, you can direct message me if you need to, or send me an email. You know how to reach me as well inside or outside of the Facebook group and inside of your ebook if you're watching this inside of your self-study course. Alrighty, so let's get started. We're going to bring up our screen, and don't forget, hopefully you have downloaded your guide for today, and you should have that available to you inside of the group. There is under guides, you have one for the 5-day challenge, write your biz story. So activity number 3 should be sitting there waiting for you if you did not already download it inside of today's email. So I give you quite a few different opportunities. You can't miss it. So no excuses. All right. With that being said, let's move on. So let me get over here and get you guys inside of, move that there, and we're going to turn you off there, and we're going to get you started here. All right. So telling your story, this is where we get a chance, this is the opportunity that you've all been waiting for. All that hard work in writing your story is going to mean a hill of beans if you don't tell anybody. Hello. So telling your story is the next step in the process. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about ways and ideas that you're going to be able to bring your story to life, as I like to call it. Alrighty, so give us 1 second here. Alrighty, so that being said, telling your story. So like we had done in the previous session, you identified your story and you fleshed it out. And again, it's a process. It's something you'll continue to do. And yes, you'll hear me say stories and story. So again, depending on what path you've chosen, as a good business owner, you have multiple stories. You didn't just land on one and that made you rich and famous. You experiences along the way. Even before you start your business, you've got stories and experiences that are worthy of a story to be told. And so you've identified your story, you've fleshed it out a little bit, at least for this first one, right? And so in this session, we're going to introduce you to some different methods of how you can not only practice, but get your story told in front of the audience that is just dying to hear from you guys. And so you'll have an opportunity to also practice live here in the Facebook group. Yes, you get to go live. And even those of you who are doing this inside of your e-course study, you too will have an opportunity to come inside of the Facebook group, practice going live with your sessions as well. So in case some of you are doing it in that fashion. And also an opportunity to do the listening. Active listening is another art form in communicating as well, because whether you know it or not, it's more about listening to your customers and what they need, what their needs are, is just as much as it is important for you to telling your story to make those connections. So they both have equal weight, let's say. And so being able to also help each other and giving each other feedback in those stories that you're going to be able to practice and tell here in the Facebook group are also important for you to do. So we encourage you to go live and do it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily, and so that you'll be ready to tell your story by the end of this challenge. And that's the whole goal. Now, a story is meaningless, like I said, unless it's told. And so telling a story isn't simply as, you know, relating to the details or following the structures and the templates outlined previously. You need to practice telling your story so that it will have the most impact. It's not something that just comes off the tip of the tongue and comes off so naturally, because you want to make sure you hit some points, right? We talked about the structures and, the challenge, the choice, the outcome. And so when you pull all those things together, it's all about the delivery of that message and being able to practice telling this story out loud. And then again, start with small. We always start small here. Keep it simple. Start small, work your way up, and then you gradually can get in front of larger audiences as well. So ultimately, you need to not only create one, but several stories. And the reason for this is that you might have different, uh, it'll be important, I should say, to have different important parts of your story, of your life, are going to impact whoever you're telling your story to. But even more so, it's that they should be tailored to different audiences. Okay. Just like you may have different customers and you don't have every product, it may not be for every customer, right? You may have a wide range of products, but that doesn't mean every customer that you have is going to buy every one of your products. And so it just kind of depends. And same thing with your services, right? So when you're creating stories and when you're choosing which one to tell and when to tell it and even where to tell it, because sometimes, where matters, and that you should always keep your audience in mind. Now, for example, if you were to say tell the story that you would normally tell to a business associate, a colleague, would certainly be different than the way you even, or the story that you would tell a customer. And so for your business customers, you may choose a story that focuses more on the specifics of your life as an entrepreneur or as a business problem you've solved, because you wanted them to be able to see themselves in a similar light. And your stories for potential customers might also be able to change how you want to make the world if you're doing something more on a social cause, and how that story is going to communicate maybe even the vision as a community and as an organizer, like we talked earlier. So the thing that you might also want to think about is creating audience personas, and then make the decision as to what kind of story is going to be appropriate. So I know many of you, if you haven't already done so, we've talked about this a bit more when we go into your personal branding exercise inside of the boot camp that'll be coming up shortly. The idea that you're going to have your target audience, and that your target audience is ideally that ideal customer, right? And so with that ideal customer, you have this ideal person in your head. It's the person between the ages of 37 and 52. They live in the suburbs, they got a dog, and they walk all the time, they exercise with their dog, and then your particular product and service meets that lifestyle for that person. So that's the persona. And the same could hold true. You want to use that same type of target audience, that ideal customer. You want to do the same thing when it comes to your audience, because sometimes your audience is an audience of one. And in other instances, it could be a huge audience inside of a massive auditorium. You never know when you will be called, people. Okay, now when we think about telling that story, the best way to choose the right story for the right audience is to create that audience persona and identify each type of audience for you may tell the story to. So creating a profile for that type of person, like I mentioned. So once you have some profiles down, right, your ideal, who do you want to get in front of? And then look at each one and then decide what kind of story would be best appropriate for that particular persona, and how effective do you think it would be to do that, what we call like almost converting, right? Or at least making a high level connection at an emotional level with them. And so sometimes your stories may be more for one persona than another. So whichever one it is, you do want to have a couple things that you'll want to consider when it comes down to choosing the particular story. So you'll ask yourself a couple of questions when it comes to telling that story. The first one is, what do they think of you? Now, the example here is, a visitor to your website doesn't trust you yet, right? They just arrived. Or the artist may see you as a mentor or more an experienced person or vice versa. Now, there's also how they connect, how connected is your audience to you? So do they feel a kinship with you? For example, a person at a networking event may feel that they already they have that connection because you're already a member too, right? So there's already a little collegiality, as we like to call it, because you're in this in group together. So there might already be that kind of kinship and that connection that makes so it's not so awkward, right? Another one is, how well does the person know you? Now, in this case, you should have different stories for a person who doesn't know you at all, meaning that the first time, like they walked off the street and they walked into into an auditorium and they're hearing you for the first time, don't know nothing else about it, as opposed to someone who has a deeper relation with you already. So, for instance, if you're teaching a course or you're offering some type of a session or you're part of a group, those things matter as far as how well they know you already, because what that also allows you to do is how you can make some inferences inside of your storytelling and be able to do some referencing that because they already know you, you don't have to go down as deep and you just maybe, tell them, remember that time when, and then because they already know you, they kind of may have heard the story, right? Things along those lines is something else to consider. You also may want to consider what the person's interests are. And as much as you're telling your story, you do want to make sure that as you're telling your story, that it does connect with the listener's interest level. So in this particular case, you should be having appropriate levels of specific interests, right? So you're not going to tell your story about fishing to a hunting group, right? Because they're like, I don't fish. So you want to make sure that your interest of theirs matches the story. And also because you want to bring up some, as I like to, you like to make analogies sometimes. So hopefully you're doing these inside of prepared speaking engagements, not off the cuff random. Although we do say this in Toastmasters, you always want to have a pocket speech, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later as well. But so there's that. You also want to think about what emotions are going to be most important for your listener in this particular case. So whenever emotions you've identified already should also be a key element in your story, and especially in the choice points or those turning points. What's going to be that emotional connection that's going to be like, that turning point where you made that choice, right? That's going to be like, oh yeah, I felt like that too. Those emotional connectors in your writing, how does that connect with the persona that you're going to be in front of? And it's also important too that this is also how you're going to be able to do your influencing and how you chose that protagonist, which in most cases it's you, and how they are portrayed in your story. If you're making up a story with respect to a customer as the protagonist, the main person in the story, then again, those emotions need to make the connections with your listening audience. And then is the listener pragmatic or are they idealistic? Now, in this particular case, this is just a trait that's a major factor on how well they'll relate to a particular audience. Okay. You also want to consider what problem or challenge can your audience relate to? Remember, if you were I lost everything and I came back like a Martha Stewart, or I gave it my all, I kept persisting and I did my breakthrough like Berry Gordy story, right? Or there's another one where maybe, what was the problem and the challenge? And again, is this something that that the audience that you're standing in front of, or at least an earshot of also has had that problem. If it's a weight loss problem and you overcame weight loss and now you are a weight loss coach, or you sell particular skincare products and you want to make sure that this is the skincare product that is great for those who have maybe been overexposed to the skin and that caused you to go through this whole radical change of life, and you had all of these things, right? So you want to just make sure that the problem or the challenge that your audience is related can also be related to through your story. Another thing is to be sure is that are the listeners' possible expectations for a good story? Everybody wants to hear a good story. They don't necessarily know it's coming. They sure don't want to be a bad story, because meaning that they want to know what's going to happen next. So you want to make sure you have the beginning, the middle, and the conclusion, and that they know that there is something to expect at the end of the story. You could kind of share with them as well. So these are 8 things that you should be in consideration of when it comes to telling your story. Now, you may also consider in telling your story, also choose different stories for both that are written as well as for your oral presentation. So what I mean by that is, from a written text, you may choose stories that are longer, maybe more involved. Consider that your audience is somebody who's going to settle in and read. Remember the learning styles. Did everybody see my video this morning that I sent? Wonder, let me see, check on the comments. So in today's video, I shared the learning styles of your customers, or adult learning styles as well. And it was the VAC. You have your visual learners, you have your auditory learners, and you have your kinesthetic learners, your VAC, V-A-K. And so those, and there's also, and visual can also be the written and writing as well. Which sometimes we put as VARC in education land. So telling your story in written word is just as important as it is when telling it in verbally for auditory learners as well. So do keep that in mind. On the other hand, for a written story, such as a story on your website, like your home page or your about page, it should be immediately attention getting and grabbing, right? It has, because you're telling us a person a story in person, it's going to be a little bit more different, and therefore may not be as important since there's somewhat of a captive audience that's sitting right there in front of you versus when you have it written on a web page. And so the web surfer is going to easily be able to click away and not finish the story, and it'll be harder for somebody to leave you face to face. So you kind of have to always kind of gauge how that can all take place for you. So again, written stories can be a little longer and be a little bit more involved, but those, standing in front of someone maybe require a little bit more refinement in keeping with the listening audience who you have a captive ear in front of. Okay. And let's see here, make sure. And like I said earlier, use your audience personas for each of the different stories so that you will have an idea of how to pull the stories that you want to be telling in front of the right people for the right reasons as well. And you'll be able to go back and make your quick edits when necessary. Now, perfecting your story. Aha, you thought it was over, didn't you? So here again, we talk about the fact that you've made your decision, you've come up with your writing, now you're in the telling stage, and even in that, the writing the story will always be something that you're going to kind of perfect and refine each time you tell it, because sometimes we have a better recall the second time around, just depending, right? Or you may want to add some facts or some data into your particular story to kind of help to fortify it a bit. But although it seems strange to talk to yourself, this is an excellent way for you to practice telling your stories. Just pick a quiet space and be able to be alone, close the door, and just begin telling your story out loud. And, maybe a commute to work or other times when you're alone is another great way to just practice telling your story. Now, you may need to have note cards if that's what it takes. Great. There aren't any rules in how you tell your story, obviously. But you want to eliminate any distractions and be able to tell your story. And noting as you go along, make any necessary changes in areas for improvement. Now, you also, once you do feel a little comfortable with your story and saying it by yourself, then you might want to start looking at how it's being said. You want to stay natural, you want to stay comfortable, be authentic. Don't try to be somebody you're not and put on a different, tone in your voice or anything along those lines. You are who you are, and you want to make sure that there's consistency between the tone and persona that you put on in your social life online is kind of matching up when people do finally meet you, and that they'll be able to do that. So you should try recording yourself. This is terribly embarrassing, I know, for a lot of people, but it's something that if you do it over and over again, it doesn't really, after a while, you're not going to be fazed by it. So please, I do encourage you all to record. And recording also kind of helps to refine and perfect your story. And it also helps in telling your story and learning hearing yourself telling it as well. And the easiest way that you can record is simply using your cell phone. And most of them are going to come with and even better if you want, use your video recording, and just as good. Either that on a camera or on your PC, like the one I'm using right now. Video is good because you can also refine not only the audio that's coming across and the quality and the tone of your voice, but those things like ums and ahs, we used to call them the crutch words, we call them in Toastmaster land, but also your eye contact and your body language. These are all going to be factors in how you present your story to your audience. If you're going to be a lot more animated, depending on the story that you're telling, than you would be when you're, of course, it being written. And so all of these factors coming into play. So auditory, you could just do cell phone voice or do the videos as well. But everybody pretty much has a cell phone, or at least they have a computer, and they can practice. These are all free tools as well. Now, I have up here on the screen is 2 apps that don't necessarily come on your platform. The other ones are generic. You should have a generic record and a video, your camera phone, to record. But here are 2 other tools that I certainly love to use, and you may want to put this in your toolkit. One is called Anchor. Now, Anchor, which has now been bought up by Spotify, just in case you wanted to know, but Anchor is an app that most of us who do podcasting is a tool for that, but you can certainly just record and then use it as a recording tool, and then you can also share it with someone. So that's the other nice thing. So there's that. The other tool is called Otter. OTTR. And Otter is a audio recording app that also will create your transcription. Isn't that funky? I love it. So for those of you who hate writing, but you got a story to tell, I suggest you try the Otter tool, where you can just start telling those tidbits of your story, get them on audio, it'll transcribe it to text, and then voila, you just do a little bit of tweak, and then you'll be able to carry that out for yourself. So the key here is when reviewing your recording is you want to make sure that your look and your sound you're comfortable in telling this story, and it should also, again, look natural, be personable, and not be fake or contrived. You don't want to come across as an actor. Remember, authenticity and transparency is all all about the storytelling in order for you to make those human connections, those emotional connections to your prospects. Another reason if you want to record is so that you can understand the timing of your story. So this is also critical if you're going to be in front of, you have a speaking engagement and you may be able to incorporate a story as a part of a keynote or just telling a quick story and introducing yourself. You just never know where those opportunities are. But a good story shouldn't be more than maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Remember, this is why I was saying earlier about keep the story should be simple, beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't have to take a lot to do it. Some key components about when it happened and why it happened and how it made you feel. So remember, go back to your day 2 notes and you will see all of the pieces and parts. If you haven't been fleshing this out, those are the constructs for you being able to write your story. But yeah, 1 or 2 minutes if is pretty much good, long enough. You don't want your listener to get fatigue and lose interest. And otherwise, you're going to lose impact. And then impact doesn't convert to a sale. All right. If you tell a longer story, then you want to kind of cut it up into chunks of minute short stories or short components so that it could all then be kind of woven together. And then you can tell parts of the story as either as a whole or as separate. So you can kind of almost repurpose it in a way. Okay. So tell your story yourself. Note as you go, make some notes and make some tweaks. Try recording yourself and do make sure that your sound is coming across good, you're being comfortable, your looks and feels are good, and then practice the timing of it as well. Because your pace also, so I've been challenged with speaking a little too fast. That comes from being a New Yorker. And so sometimes we can get in fast talking mode because that's how we talk in New York. We talk fast versus a little bit more low key. And you want to be able to make your emphasis and, oh, gosh, I forgot the other word, but I can't think of it right now. Anyway, pace is going to be good. You don't want to be too fast and you don't want to be too slow and you're sounding like a turtle. So keep it in a right kind of a rhythm. It just takes practice, people. This is not magic we're talking about, okay? Now, going live with your story. So once your story has been well formed and it's natural and you're prepared times properly, and it's just kind of now it's kind of time for you to get in front of some real people, a real audience. Who is that audience going to be? So consider some low risk opportunities, I like to call that. So where you can try out your personal story. So try practicing in front of your friends, front of your colleagues, tell them that you're practicing your story and you'd love to get some feedback. Never hurts to ask. Friends usually like to help. If nothing else, and most of the time your friends are pretty critical and they're going to give you like their like immediate feedback because they're your friends. And if they're good friends, they're going to give you the right feedback. And Ingham is like, you need some work. Take it with a grain of salt though, because you never know. But feedback is always good. Now, gradually, you're going to start trying to get out your story in, for real in front of maybe some smaller groups. Look for opportunities. That's the game here. Look for opportunities, such as when someone asks you maybe about your company. Anytime somebody asks you about who you are, what you do, what your company is, that's your plug. That's your opportunity to kick right in and start telling your story. That's why your story should not be too long. You can have multiple, but in this particular case, your why and how you do it and all that, you can truncate that enough so that you'll have that as that's a speaking engagement, that's a speaking opportunity. Anytime somebody asks you, what do? You should be able to quickly share a story. Again, the setting matters, so do keep that in mind. And then try out in front of groups or associations for which you belong in. I know you may start, again, something small, depending on the circumstances. You may be able to do it online, you may be able to do it face to face. But again, you want to gradually get into bigger audiences and bigger audiences and bigger audiences. And otherwise, you don't want to get to a point where you're going to feel like you're overwhelmed and you get a little too, your confidence level starts to drop. So you certainly don't want that. But your story is never going to be finished, right? You always want to have an opportunity to find ways to tighten it up, to tweak it, make it more relevant. Things happen over the years. You may be able to say, well, this is what happened then, but now I know 16 years later, this is how things look, right? So there's those opportunities when you can really start to tweak, again, check data, bring some of the facts in that made me more relevant today than they were 10 years ago. So you want to make those types of changes to your story. Remember too that whenever you're telling your story, again, start with your audience. Consider your audience, the position your story is in for them. Again, things like the age, things like gender, things like, let's see what else I got. Background of your audience, maybe from a professional backgrounds. They may all be part of an association. They may all have gone to similar institutions or specialties, depending on where those are. Again, you want to tailor it for them. You want to be able to bring language that they're accustomed to hearing, and you want to bring that into the story. Again, your stories are things, again, on your webpage, the things that you'll say when you're in front of people. They could, like a prepared speech, you may be on a podcast, you may have an opportunity to speak in front of a different, even in a golf game. You never know where those opportunities of telling your story are going to hold true. And again, pay attention to the feedback as much as it is. I know it's hard. You'll be telling this story and you're trying really hard to focus on getting the story told. But it's also important that you're able to read your audience. And again, audience of 1 is no different than the audience of 100. Watch other people's body language as you're speaking to make sure that you are making the proper connections, and how are they responding to those connections as well. It's your word choices, your tone, even your posture and how you're positioning yourself between you and the other people. Even on stage, your positioning and how you hold yourself all plays into the way in which you're going live with your story. But overall, don't try to do too much at one time. I know it seems like it may sound like a lot, but do just try your best. And that's why it's important that you make the different choices in getting your stories told. All right. All right. If you have any comments, leave them in the chat box. I'm going to get to them. Unfortunately, the way my computer is set up, I can only be on one screen at a time. So do post your questions. I'll be more than happy to I'll address any of them. If you have any comments or any feedback, go ahead and just shoot them on the side of the comment box, okay? Now, that opportunity to telling your story. Now, once again, you finish your practicing and you're looking for those more real world experiences, for opportunities to get that story told, you are, again, we're already told about how to select the groups and the people for those trial runs. You also, now is the time for you to use it in that wider, bigger audience, so past the friends and the small intimate groups. Now you can get into some larger ones. So here, we talk about presentations. And now, if you have an upcoming presentation and you have an opportunity to tell your personal story as a part of a bigger presentation, if you have a story that's related to the subject matter of the presentation and the audience, and is open for you to do so and make that integration of it, great. A personal story is a great opener in most cases. Just telling, if you're in front of your audience, to kind of break the ice in a sense. I tend to do that when I do trainings and things. You want to tell a quick story, an analogy of some sort, possibly. This is why a lot of people like to do TED Talks. Because if you're using your PowerPoint, consider devoting maybe one slide just to your story and then move on with the rest, right? Just a little seed that you want to drop, and it makes it more personable, and people are able again to make those connections with you. Another opportunity, of course, is inside of a meeting space, depending on, again, the opportunities and the settings. But again, if you're looking for any type of an upcoming meeting with new people where you'll be expected to introduce yourself, there again is an opportunity. You should have that "let me introduce yourself" story to the new people so they don't know you. Remember, your audience, these are people you haven't met before. Like if you just started a new job, or you are starting with a new client and you're standing in front of maybe their staff, you want to be able to, maybe another opportunity to tell your story. Personal stories make great professional introductions. Then there's groups. Now, are there any groups where you can share your story? For example, do you belong to a local business group like BNI, or an entrepreneurial group outside of this group? The Busy 9-to-5ers Hive, you're going to be able to share your story inside of here. Toastmasters, which is near and dear to me, is an organization. It's a fabulous organization, as I shared here in this last slide. Toastmasters International is a wonderful organization that helps to build leaders and speakers. And so it's a great place if you are feeling awkward, or you feel as though, speaking in front of people is just not always comfortable for any and everybody. And I totally get that. But don't use that as an excuse for not doing it. Toastmasters is not for anyone it's not for perfection. Toastmasters is a wonderful platform where you get to meet great people, as well as practice telling stories and speaking, and choosing different types of ways of delivering your stories is all that this is about. Is a wonderful space for you to gain practice on a routine basis. They typically meet weekly in many instances. I'm sure there's one around the corner from where you are right now. It is a large international space. So no matter what country you are in, I am more than guaranteeing that there is a local Toastmasters near you. And guess what? Yes, that's right. They're also online. No, I am not a spokesperson for Toastmasters, but I am an active member and titled as Competent Leader is the audacious title that I hold. But again, another place where you can practice in your presenting, as far as inside of groups, and get all that game. So go to toastmastersinternational.org. It's a space online, and you can just type in your zip code and you'll be able to find a local place for that. Okay, great. Now, another thing for you to consider are conferences. Again, this is an opportunity where you can, again, share your story along with your profession. No matter what you're doing, somebody's always putting on a conference or they're putting on a summit, and you have an opportunity to share as you're introducing your business to other people. And this is also an opportunity, again, you have to do that truncated version, the pocket baby version of your story, so that you can use it kind of like that elevator pitch and be able to introduce yourself to new people as you're meeting them inside of a conference setting. So, and there's also opportunities, again, they're looking for presenters inside of conferences or in your expertise. So look for opportunities for that. I do that all the time. Another one, of course, are interviews. And I know most of you are interviewing for yourselves because you want to transition from employee to entrepreneur. But again, for those of you who are doing your side gig and you love what you do during the day and you are in pursuit of other professional opportunities, then interviews is another opportunity when you're going to be able to, tell a quick story, because that's typically how they'll break the ice with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What are you going to say? Another story. And then, of course, you have your online story opportunities. Here again, you'll be able to share online opportunities as well in telling your story, again, on your webpage, on your social media profiles, and introducing yourself with online. And we're going to practice and play with that a lot more in tomorrow's session. So we're going to focus a lot more on those online opportunities. Now, one of the things you'll be changing your story to suit your listener is you want to make sure that you'll want to consider, right, that your audience not only knows when you're creating, I'm sorry, make sure I said that right. Okay, sorry. My note got twisted. Okay, so here again, changing your story to suit the listener. So again, as I mentioned a little earlier, you'll want to consider your audience not only when creating and choosing your stories, but when you are telling them. So when you find it, you need to kind of, expedite or change your story slightly to better suit that audience. You might need to change the timing, the pacing of it. You may need to make things maybe a little longer, a little shorter, or maybe put emphasis on certain things, a little parts of your story that you may not have thought about before. You also might want to change the main character, and what I mean by that there is slightly, so he or she, so it's more relatable to your audience. Again, if you're talking in front of um, a set of entrepreneurs versus or person or business people, then telling it when you're telling it to investors, then you want to make sure that you're telling it a little bit differently than you would maybe to customers. And again, you want to make sure that the main character's role is in the story is adaptable to whoever is listening to your story. Now, you also want to change some things up, like maybe the setting, or you might want to emphasize different aspects of the background in the story that's going to suit your audience as well. Being as specific as possible. We talked about that a bit yesterday, as being, all of those different elements and trying to hit on those five senses are also critical as well when you think about your audience and the timing of it. So alter the background sometimes, just again, maybe resemble more of who you're speaking to and making those connections. You don't have to fabricate. You just want to make sure you can make as adaptable as possible. And like I mentioned earlier, you may want to include some data, some jargon, some figures, some technical pieces. Again, when you're talking about money, for instance, you do want to make sure that you tailor it to tell a difference. Maybe if, when you talk about money in investor terms versus if you're telling money and trying to get people to donate, those are types of tweaks that you want to make sure that you kind of have that common ground in the word choices as well. So that's also kind of critical. I know for me in the industry, when we talk about like in education, we have a lot of jargon, a lot of words, a lot of acronyms. We want to stay away from that. So be mindful of, again, that you're not talking above people's heads, that you're choosing your word choices are like, I don't know what this guy is talking about, so I'm going to sit over here and file my nails, because there's just a disconnect. So you want to make sure that you're always being mindful of that. And then your tone, again, according to the story and who you're talking to, if it's supposed to be an upbeat story, then your voice and your tone and your body needs to be upbeat. If you were down and out and trodden, then your body should be down and out trodden. So things need to match. So just be kind of mindful of that. And again, just make sure you're able to be comfortable with telling one story before you start altering it too many times in a different version of the story. Okay, so don't have so many versions you can get the first one down good, if you know what I mean. The process of writing and telling are different. Those different personal stories will get easier with you once you get more practice in, as with everything else. Alrighty. So where are we at right now? So we're ready to take action. So one of the things, again, is practice telling one of your stories to a close friend, a colleague, or a mentor. Ask for feedback so that they can be encouraging, but in what was not interesting. You kind of want to know, like, what worked, what hit you, what didn't hit you. Ask critical questions, be specific so you can get the feedback that you're looking for. Okay. Again, think about revising your story. So that, again, look back at the different story types that we talked about in day 2, and after practicing and implementing, and then make the necessary edits so that they are based on the feedback and the reactions from what you got with the first time as you're doing your practices. The next thing is you want to do is now that you've practiced your story and now that you have some opportunities for telling your story and who that key audience is going to be to hear that story and how you're going to have maybe different versions of the story. So you just want to just keep in mind you have all these opportunities to say it in different ways in front of different people for different opportunities. And again, when you talk about your written story, again, you're going to have the opportunity to incorporate that story on your website, in your social media channels. I'm going to talk a lot more about that tomorrow, like in LinkedIn, in your profiles. Review your About Us or About Me page, sections in that social media. Add it to pieces of your personal stories already if you haven't done so. And just keep revising and revisiting it. And the more that you tweak it and the more things change or get better, or you want to add things to it as you continue to evolve. Once you've left your business, once you've left that step of being an entrepreneur, being in from an employee and transitioning over to entrepreneurship, that's a story, that's a journey you want to be able to share with other people as well. Take them on the journey with you. That's a story that you could be in the making, I like to say. So always look for that as another opportunity. All righty. So tomorrow, my peeps, so you have a lot already on your plate. But remember, pick one story, practice that one simple story that you pull together. Remember, challenge, choice, outcome. Keep it simple, 1 to 2 minutes. Let's be ready to tell that story in tomorrow's session, and or rather in your last session. Give you some more time to practice. But tomorrow we're going to have some fun. Tomorrow we're going to be all about your story online. You're going to get some templates, going to have some tools, going to give you some tips, have some fun, and how you'll be able to show up online. That's your next challenge, day 4. So look forward to seeing you all there for that. I'm going to wrap this up over here. All righty. So that was a lot, don't you think? I think we covered a lot of ground at the same time. So there's a lot to be said about telling your story. Now that you have it written down, how it's told, who you say it in front of, all rolled into one. So there's an opportunity for you to really start thinking about how you're going to show up with your stories. And so I'm going to give you this time now to, if you have any questions, post them inside of the group. Post them inside of direct message me, or you can shoot me an email, either one. Look in your inboxes for the next update for day 4 of the 5-day challenge. Write your biz stories. As always, it's been my pleasure as your host and coach, Dr. Yam. Keep it simple, coach. You know how to reach me. And for now, let's get busy. Take care. Bye-bye.